On our first day in the Swiss countryside on one of our trips, we stopped to look at the scene across a lake at some mountains. And as we turned around to get back in the car, I realised that's a castle. You could tell I came from Australia. So I took a photo, we jumped in the car. I don't know what the castle is, when it was built, who owned it. But I thought it would make a charming picture and a good exploration of drawing with pen. So it proved to be more difficult, trickier than I thought. This is not actually my first start on this scene. I started with a 0.2mm pen and I just found it too heavy to get the details I wanted. And so I stopped and started again using a 0.1mm pen for the castle. When I finished the actual castle, I switched to a 0.2mm pen and used a heavier line for the closer objects. But I did want to have the sense that this castle both towered over the scene, but also that it sat back a little bit from the buildings and the trees and the other structures that we have in front. So at this point, I'm really trying to get it looking right from the angles of the roof. And I'm also aligning horizontally quite a bit with these three small corner towers that we can see, and where the top and bottom of their little steeple roof things are. So I'm looking to see where the top of the right hand one is in relation to the left hand one and in relation to the one in the center. And by doing this, I'm doing my best to align things accurately. And then we've got these 5 windows across the top, which I bodge up a little bit, and there's 2 down the side. Now at this stage, I've really got no idea how I'm going to render the castle beyond the line work. I'm thinking I might just keep it as a fairly light line. I was thinking that might just work well with the relatively simple lines of the castle and the fact that I want it to look a bit further away. So now I have this turret of a building that's closer than the castle, but I decide to keep this also in the 0.1mm, and I can always go over it if need be. So I'm just finishing the last parts of the castle before I switch now to a heavier pen for the foliage. And now I have. Now with the foliage, I'm trying to draw the effect of these trees. I don't just want a big tangle of line going across the center of my scene. I want to represent the fact that there are different trees, and some sit in front of others sit behind. We've got a fir tree right in the background in front of the right-hand tower of the castle, and we've got a much closer tree on the left-hand side, and then a tree not quite as close, but closer than most of the trees in the midground on the lower right. So I'm wanting to do line work and make choices with how I render the foliage that will give a sense of separation of trees that overlap each other, but also a sense of different colour and of light and shade as well. So I'm also using a dotted line really just to try and establish the general silhouette of each tree. And then I'm really defining the tree through negative space of any shadow that comes up against an edge that's in sunlight, and generally through the hatching. Now this tree on the left-hand side, which is the largest tree, is the only one where I'm trying to at times, particularly on the very edge, on the silhouette edge, I'm trying to suggest actual leaves. And by doing that, I try to give the impression that this is a very large tree. Now, what a terrible line I did for that, I don't know if it's a castle wall on the right-hand side. So I corrected it, and I'm planning to cover up the wobbly line to the left of the line I really want with shadow on the tree. and it worked quite well. And it's why I think it's always best to put the right line in on top of the wrong line, because I find invariably we can make some effort to hide or lessen at least the impact of the wrong line. And with this street light, I want to make sure there's a lot of nice dark values coming up alongside of it to emphasize it and to just create a nice visual contrast with the foliage. So I'm working on all of these trees here and working on the scale. Now I've clearly drawn my drawing larger than my reference, which wasn't my intention, but that's just the way it's gone. And that's fine, except I am going to get very close to the bottom of the paper. But I do manage to get the lowest elements on. And so now I need to look at these lower elements, this building to the lower left. And it takes just a little bit of time to work out exactly where I'm going to place things, because I have changed the scale and it's not quite as simple as just drawing a horizontal line in my head from the reference to the paper. And in fact, when I began to do the foliage line at the top, I wasn't as aware that my scale had increased as I was shortly after. And so there's a little bit of a gap that I have to create some foliage just between some of the foliage I've drawn and the tops of these roofs further down. But trees are very forgivable if we don't quite get them the way we want them to be. So again, I'm just trying to create silhouette outlines, nice jagged edge, and then create enough variation in line and in direction to both separate trees and also give a sense of different types of trees. And this tree down in the front right has a lot of hatching because it's mostly in shadow. Working at the hatching and thinking, well, I'm really going to end up drawing more of this than I expected, and I'm thinking I'll put the street level in, at least in a simplified way, although even then I ended up doing more of it from the reference than I had planned. Really just going down now with the detail. I've got plenty of drawing done already that I can align this to, certainly horizontally. So I just need to pay particular attention to how far down the page I introduce elements. And I spend a fair bit of time with that figure, just making sure that it sits in the right place, because once I put that figure there, it really is going to lock in the sense of scale and size and closeness and distance of all of these foreground things. And I'm going to have to make sure that the cars, when I draw them, look credible in terms of scale with that figure. So a fair bit of time just trying to get it right. I'm not trying to make it particularly look like that figure. It's really too small a scale for me to do that. And so now just more foliage, more hatching, thinking where to go next. There was quite a bit of thinking where to go next. I've cut out some of the spots where the pen wasn't moving and I was just trying to work out where will I go next. In real time, this took me 28 and 18 minutes. So that's almost 50 minutes this took to draw. So just trying to work out the scale of these cars on the left-hand side. At the start, I had thought I'd just draw this car, but I finished up doing the row of parked cars that come further into the scene. I did decide, though, not to do the car on the extreme lower right. I think I just put a few too many lines where it needed to go. So just working on these cars now. And look, while I'm doing this, I'm trying to work out what am I going to do with the castle. I had thought I would leave it as it is because it is a fairly light subject and it is some height distance away. But the more I looked at it, it looked almost a bit like a ghost castle. It just was too pale. So I decided firstly to add a bit of detail just on this, I presume it's part of a castle wall on the right hand side, and just to add a hint of the very small stonework that makes up that wall. So again, I'm creating the effect of the stonework. I'm not drawing the detail of it accurately. And then I put the shade that's on the front of all these buildings. So the sun was overhead, and it was overhead in a way that it was actually casting a very slight shade over almost the entire castle that we could see. So there are no strong shadows particularly, and it left me wondering what was I going to do. I just felt it was a bit whitish, a bit garish almost. But then I didn't want to end up putting too many lines on it and making it too dark, because I did want it to have a light and airy feeling. So I go back to my 0.1, and the first thing I decide to do is to put some horizontal lines on to create the colour of the tiles, the fact that they're a darker colour than the walls. So I do that first and think, well, I'll see how that looks. And I switch pens and get one that works. And so now I'm doing these lines, hatching pretty much on the perspective angle. And there is a shadow in the corner there, the lower left corner. And now doing the hatching on the towers, on the tiles for the towers. I don't know whether they're tiles or shingles. And I'm thinking, yes, this does help. This was a good choice to do. But I'm still thinking, do I put any line work on the castle itself? Because I've used all this hatching that now indicates light direction, and yet the castle is as if it's bathed in 360-degree light. So now I feel like it's not looking as natural, as real as the other elements. So I decided that I'm going to do a light vertical hatching. So it's going to be vertical, which separates it both from the hatching on the roof for the colour mostly, and also the hatching for the trees. And I do keep it very light, and I just do a little bit heavier hatching between planes that I want to emphasise the difference between them, such as where the towers meet the walls. And then I realised I forgot this little turret in the centre of the picture. So I do a little bit of work on that and just a few more details. There are pennants, Swiss pennants hanging off each of the towers. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Well, what do you think of my Swiss castle? I've got to say, this was a more challenging drawing than I expected. I thought it was going to be quite simple. But again, sometimes simple ends up being more challenging because it's more obvious if we don't quite get things right. But look, if you want to have a go and see how challenging you find it, I'll put this photo on my channel community page. You can get it there, screenshot it, and have a go drawing it yourself. So why don't you? And the trees also are a bit of a challenge. But look, whatever you draw and however you draw it, and whether it's a challenge or not, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.